Buiten zoemt het stadsverkeer van Londen. Een ernstige buurt, vol verleden. Soms trillen zijn handen, soms niet aldoor. In de hal hangt hij zoals iedereen hem kent, die ook maar een beetje houdt van muziek, van schoonheid, van dat onnavolgbare vibrato van zijn vioolspel. Niet te veel, niet te weinig, maar precies zoals God het in gedachten moet hebben gehad. Of Beethoven, of Bartók. Een gezicht dat doorloopt in een viool, of andersom. Toen hij 12 was en Mozart speelde, kwam Einstein na afloop in zijn kleedkamer, zeggende: "Nu weet ik dat er een God in de hemel is." God is 81 jaar oud als ik hem ontmoet. Zijn moeder haalde ruim de 100.
The instant really is the continuity. There's no such thing as an instant divorced from past and future. The instant is simply the present continuity, our life. It's not as if it were an instantaneous photograph of something that didn't exist before or after. An instant is the actual now and as it moves with us through time.
Hij is kleiner dan ik dacht. Bijna fragiel. Hij loopt als een vlinder. 2 gehoorapparaten in, waaraan hij nu en dan draait. Vreemd. De belichaming van de muziek is hardhorend. Soms geeft hij antwoord op een vraag die ik niet stelde. Als ik het over ontroering heb, zal hij over Israël beginnen. Omdat hij niet goed hoorde wat ik vroeg? Omdat hij privé-emoties liever uit de weg gaat? Het is een donderdagmorgen in november. Ach, die onmogelijke vragen ook. Welke compositie, welke componist symboliseert het huwelijk tussen schoonheid en troost?
It's very, very difficult. It might even be Schubert.
Rückert-Lieder?
What?
De Rückert-Lieder?
Yes, yes. I think Schubert. It's difficult to say. Difficult to say. It could be something that makes you cry more than you would otherwise, like the quintet of Schubert with 2 cellos, as the woman, which is intolerable at a funeral. It's absolutely impossible because you just break down. Or it could be something that takes you out of the sadness with serenity. Like some wonderful, serene Beethoven slow movement. I don't really know exactly. I don't know. Can't tell you. I know that in a rather trivial way, perhaps, I would always end my concerts for the soldiers with the Ave Maria of Schubert, because that was satisfied their need, their nostalgia, homesickness, and it was an easy way to end, you see, because I say, and now, to end the program, I will play. And then everyone was satisfied.
Wat is het meesterwerk van schoonheid en troost? Zo plat is die vraag. Grote stappen, snel thuis. Tenminste in Londen, waar we elkaar voor de eerste maal treffen. Maar als we elkaar een tijd later opnieuw ontmoeten, in een heel ander oord, ligt het antwoord plots voor het grijpen.
The truth of the ninth is like typically Beethoven. He almost speaks in quotations. I mean by that it's partly the great truth of life, which is that we all depend on each other, and the harmonies are necessary, and the dissonances are necessary, and it's all necessary. It's also the truth of an axiom, whether it is a literary axiom or a scientific mathematical axiom. Because an equation, a perfect equation, like Einstein's famous equation of matter and energy, reduces to the most economical, actually smallest dimension, a great truth. And the truth is always two elements that equal each other. And in Einstein's case, the most disparate elements that we'd never imagine have a common denominator. They equal each other in a certain proportion, multiplied by the speed of light. All right.
And Beethoven?
And Beethoven's...
The ninth?
You can't say a greater truth than two descending fourths. At the beginning of the... It's so simple. You can't reduce it anymore.
It's the total sublimation.
He composed in a different way from others. He didn't embellish. He reduced. It's like Leonardo da Vinci drawing skeletons before he drew a body. He took away the flesh and wanted to know what the skeleton was like before he put the flesh on. And it's just fourths and fifths. It's but behind it, there's the whole energy of the atom. There's a whole nuclear energy which explodes within 12 bars. It explodes into that. Well, you know. Such will, such determination, such assurance of speaking the truth, of knowing the truth. Because many people think they know, but they don't. Beethoven knew, and he knew he knew. You know, there's a Chinese proverb, which is a lovely one. Men are four. He who knows not, and knows he knows not, he is a child, teach him. He who knows not, and knows not he knows not, he's a fool, shun him. He who knows, and knows not he knows, he is asleep, wake him. He who knows, and knows he knows, he's wise, follow him.
Duizenden interviews heeft hij gegeven. Je verwacht vastgeroeste verhalen. Weinig sporen meer van verbazing of zelfs maar interesse. Ook al was hij in de briefwisseling vooraf nog zo enthousiast. Hij wil wel een beschouwing houden over schoonheid en troost. Hij heeft een A4'tje volgekrabbeld met aantekeningen. Maar liever is het hem als we wat praten. Vraag maar. Vraag maar. Maar waar begin je in godsnaam? Na een leven dat aan alle kanten uit zijn voegen barst. Begin je met een enkel citaat uit zijn autobiografie. Dat lijkt aan te sluiten bij het thema. In your book, there's one sentence. I was never happier. Do you remember when it was that you were never happier?
There have been a few such. No, I can't remember the specific. It must have been a personal thing.
Yeah.
I don't think it had to do with the public.
No.
Must have been. Was it when a child was born, or was it a reconciliation, or
no,
or some word that was said?
No.
or some nature.
You were in Venice under a summer night sky.
Yes.
After a concert.
Yes, I remember that.
Paganini, B minor.
A disastrous concert. A disastrous concert. I was totally unprepared. First of all, I thought the concert was going to be at night. And I went to sleep and would have a chance to work and look at the music and refresh, because I hadn't played that concerto in time for a long time. Instead, as soon as I got into bed, they said, well, why aren't you here? The concert is starting in a few minutes. And it was really a very bad concert. I was somewhat ashamed, because dear Rafael Kubelik came to the concert, and he was sitting with Diana in the audience. And when I came to the cadenza at the end of the first movement of the Paganini B minor, which I remembered perfectly well, I suddenly went totally blank. I couldn't remember the cadenza, so I improvised something or other. It was very, very short. And then I played the final trill and went on, you see, and went on. But, and anyway, I hated the hall. It was an underground hall.
Teatro Nuovo.
Nuovo.
Right.
Horrible. And as it was an afternoon concert, and the Italians have the wonderful habit at that time, I don't know now anymore, but at that time you were brought your fee in cash. It was usually a big packet, and my accompanist put it in his back pocket and was visibly higher after the interval than he was before. And so I took the packet, we dashed back to the hotel, and I asked the porter, when is the next train for Venice? And he said, well, it was just half hour or so. We threw our things together, dashed to the station, got on the train just as it was moving, and a few hours later, Diana and I were in Venice. And the worst of the memories of the concert were wiped out completely as we walked onto the gondola and went to the Danieli Hotel. And
the relief was immense.
The relief was immense. I mean, it was being relieved of a horrible symptom, you know. And it was as if the concert had never happened. The concert, in fact, I was grateful for the concert because we could be in Venice. So it washed off.
It's a kind of metaphor for beauty and consolation.
Yes, it is.
You can only earn your beauty and your consolation.
It's the opposite. It's not the music that's the consolation. It's the post-music that is the consolation.
Moet je hiermee beginnen? Met een enkele anekdote over die violist die hij ooit was? Of begin je met een jeugdherinnering aan de schoonheid? Toen hij 8 was. Nee, niet die viool, maar Pavlova. De Russische danseres, wier schoonheid hij later zou terugvinden in zijn huidige tweede echtgenote. Ik bedoel, terwijl je je nog afvraagt waar je eigenlijk moet beginnen, en Menuhin zich dat ook afvraagt, zijn we inmiddels al een klein kwartier onderweg. You once saw Pavlova dancing.
Yes.
Later in your adult life, she came really to life, and your wife, Diana.
Yes.
Can you still remember Pavlova dancing?
Yes. I'd never seen anything as beautiful in a human being. I'd never seen motion, which is basic to our lives. The motion of a beautiful body disciplined into an ephemeral elegance and lightness.
As if flying.
As if it were flying, as if it were gossamer. And then, of course, one of her famous numbers was the California poppy, which was my favorite flower at the time. It's a wild poppy that grows in California, yellow, very beautiful, very soft petals, and a small flower about that big. And she danced the California poppy. And then outside, as if to balance that, outside the theater, I saw great trunks. In those days, people traveled with great trunks full of dresses and that also awakened in me this feeling of the wandering artist, the wandering from town to town. So that was quite an image which I never lost, because I'd never seen any human being representing so much beauty. And that image continued in my mind until I saw Diana sitting on the pouf in here at Chesham Street, just around the corner, for the first time and during the war. And she was so, not only so beautiful, but so alive and so intelligent and so brilliant, and that it seemed as if it were destiny that made it right. But it didn't come right for about 3 years, during which time I was trying to become free, as it were, and I couldn't bring myself to divorce my first wife.
We praten in een doodstille kamer, ingericht door zijn vrouw Diana, de reïncarnatie van Pavlova. Met schilderijen aan de muur van mij onbekenden. Ik vergat hem te vragen wie het zijn. En op een tafeltje in de hoek de jonge Menuhin. Maar misschien is het belangrijker dat we hem filmden tijdens de generale repetitie van de 9e van Beethoven. Het orkest is aan het inspelen. 2 verdiepingen hoger zit Menuhin in de dirigentenkamer. Zo'n onbestemde kamer. Een doorgangskamer voor zoveel dirigenten, dus wat moet je erop hangen? In die onbestemde ruimte bezingt hij de schoonheid en de troost van de 9e.
In the first movement there is energy and tenderness. In the second movement it's wonderful contrast between the sort of fireworks of the scherzo and the sort of wonderful rustic melody in the woodwinds and the and then and the slow movement is quite, for me, that reaches the heights. Yes, the molto adagio, which I do take molto adagio molto. Because again, Beethoven begins with a transparent, almost transparent melody, which later becomes very ornamented, each time more and more ornamented. But the beginning must be in the same tempo as the later ornamentations, when you have even 12 notes to the quaver. So it's a slow tempo. It's wonderful. It must be just suspended in space, still. Oh, it's extraordinary. Of course, the last movement is quite. And the last movement releases. You see, you have to have spent a lot of emotion before you can be happy, before that dream of brotherhood. It can only be the result of a release after you've been through the whole gamut, the whole
oceans of suffering
and of every kind of emotion. It's like the great Passion of Bach. It's like a great theatre piece of Shakespeare. You know every emotion. You know resentment, and you know love, and you know hate, and you know philosophy, and you know patience, and you know impatience, and then finally,
serenity.
Serenity prepares then the joy of the
final joy.
Final, although it begins with an explosion. You remember, it still begins with a sad, and it's only when the tenor comes, it says, we must banish these thoughts, we must banish them. And then comes very delicately the theme of brotherhood. And very slow. And then builds up. Almost the whole last movement is in one tempo. Even almost the whole movement is in one tempo. Oh, it's the grandest of works. Yeah.
Isn't that one of his beauties? Not only the tragedy of life being sublimated into the music, but the iron rhythm of Beethoven. It goes on in the same rhythm.
Yes. There you
if
are.
We talk about sheer beauty.
You're absolutely right. There's a continuous thread of approximately one human being with his heart going through. Sometimes a little faster, a little slower, but there's basically one chief rhythm going through.
Yeah.
Even the it's the scherzo, 2 bars of the scherzo could equal 1 crotchet of the first movement. Could. And 3 bars of the scherzo could be approximately a little less than 1 crotchet of the slow movement. It's because it comes in 3.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's in 3 bars, sometimes in 4. Yeah. It's about that tempo. It's very interesting when you try to see how the tapestry is woven together. It's an extraordinary unity.
Okay, you go down to a rehearsal of one of the masterpieces of Beauty and Consolation.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, enjoy it.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Did you have a good trip?
Yes, thank you very much, Master.
Het is een zaterdagmiddag, ergens op deze schitterende, godvergeten wereld. Als Yehudi Menuhin zich naar een concertzaal begeeft om daar de 9e te gaan repeteren. Die symfonie met die fameuze, altijd verkeerd geïnterpreteerde woorden. Alle Menschen werden Brüder.
Which isn't bad. But then I had a lot of work to do, and repacking and so on. So I slept from 2 to, well, I meant to sleep from 2 to 5, but I slept from 2 to 2:30, and then from 2:45 to 3:15.
Because you were worrying about not waking up in time, huh?
I know.
Awful.
My feeling is of being deeply touched by the faith that one day, which must happen, because unless we're going to commit suicide and massacre each other and murder each other, we will have to take on the responsibilities of man and womankind. Because we are as I will say tonight too, we are the only animal that is influenced and who is responsible for his like and for life all over the world by men and women and children 12,000 miles away. And that differentiates us. The hyena is a wonderful animal that hunts in packs, like tribes. They depend on each other, they work together, they know how to attack and how to survive. But they're not responsible even for hyenas in Siberia, but we are. And if we live up to that responsibility, maybe something good will happen. If we don't, then we are condemned. Hello.
Good.
Lovely to
afternoon.
see you. Lovely to see you. Lovely. Lovely to see you. Lovely. Now, what do you think we should begin with? Should we begin with a slow movement?
It will be good. Yes.
And then the choir will come, we'll do the last, and then afterwards we do the first and second, right?
So it's too hard?
No, it's a little too high, but can we bend this? It doesn't bend, does it? No, that's all right. That's all right. Right.
61 takt. Ram, przed i legato. Przed i legato.
Right. Yes. So I'll give you quavers. 1, 2, and 1. No. I think that was a childish fantasy, a vision, as you say, of bringing peace and goodwill and compassion to the world through music, which has continued to be the theme, as it were, of my life. And it began with this revelation of the chaconne as the greatest musical monument for violin. But it seemed to me the Sistine Chapel, where Michelangelo worked and which was the holiest place in the world, that if I brought music there the way I thought it should be played, that it would radiate peace to the whole world. Childish, and yet containing a grain of truth. That one grain which is still valid, and that is, practically speaking, if people sing and dance together, it does bridge the differences between them.
What was your imagination? How should it be played?
Well, my feeling was that I had to play it very well if this is to happen. That if I played it less than perfection, it couldn't happen. It had to be so perfect. And if it didn't happen, and the world was my fault, because I didn't play it well enough.
And all the misery was...
Yes, it was entirely my fault, yes.
Yeah.
And
Can you still remember rehearsing the chaconne?
Oh,
For
I
the
remember
first time?
working. I remember working on it, thinking on it, working on it with Enesco, and he was my greatest teacher. And gradually forming my own concept of this architecture, this music which is deeply, profoundly moving, emotional, and yet not indulgent in any way, not sentimental, strong. And I'll never forget the Enesco telling me at the second great climax before the very end, where the key returns to D minor, having been in D major, with the B flat chord, the sixth. He said, that reminds me, you should think, of the Madonna, of the weeping Madonna of Riemenschneider. And when I did go to, what German town is it that has all the Riemenschneiders? I forget. Anyway, and saw these extraordinary statues, And this weeping, which is an inner emotion, it is not weeping to the world, it's weeping within oneself. I'll never forget those words. Whenever I play, there are two points, two moments in music that always reminds me of a word or an image. This is the one in the Chaconne, the Weeping Madonna, at this precise place, and the return after the cadenza of the main theme of the Beethoven Violin Concerto, where Louis Persinger, who used to mark my music with fingerings and bowings and didn't mark anything here, but just put the word worship, wrote it in his lovely, elegant handwriting on this place. And I've never played it without thinking of that.
Yeah. Madonna worship.
Yes. That's too loud. Can you make any more difference? No, that's fine. You'll play it beautifully. The even more freely. You try to play it freely, but it, if you remember D, A, F, exaggerate a little bit. You can do it. You can do it better than anyone. Let's try it. The G, A, B flat, F. All right. The A is G. It's the Vorhalte, you know, the appoggiatura. Hold the appoggiatura. Just that one. That's the idea. That's right. Good. All right. May we do 3 bars before, or 4 bars before the next Andante Moderato? This utopia will never be achieved, but I think we must live by our ideals. That is what makes us mad. That is what makes the human being other than other animals, that he has learned to look at himself and he asks himself why. So he is automatically a schizophrenic, automatically, because he's divided between the reality of survival, food, shelter, etc., and being possessed by the drive towards the infinite, being possessed by that ideal, which is always greater than he is, always greater than he can accomplish, and which represents that infinite of which he is possessed, because we are inhabited by the future and the past and the present everywhere. We are the rays from the sun, cosmic rays, and vibrations of music. They come in, they impinge on us, and so that we are a parcel, but an essential parcel, because we cannot be destroyed. We can be changed, but we can't be destroyed. So that this eternal change and the fact that we belong to the whole drives us towards that infinity. When the ambition is restricted to matter, to the reality, what we call the reality of possession and now, then we can never build palaces large enough or be sufficiently in authority.
That's fine. That's fine. And don't die on the long note. Even if a little accelerondo it must live, it must grow. It's a bit the bar before andante moderato. Pianissimo.
We are driven to tyranny and to the greatest excesses because we want to be master of the whole world. We want to have the security through domination. And that is, of course, a very limited security and is self-defeating, because at one point or another, your supporters will turn against you, inevitably. So that it's very rare that a great conqueror or tyrant dies in bed. Very rare. And so that we know that there is something beyond that. But it is the same drive which drives us to religion, I mean the highest religion. I don't mean the fundamentalist reversion to matter. I mean the religion which unites us, because legare, lier, relier, comes from to bind us together, binds us together with the infinite. And that leads us to great art, to music, and was in fact the main component of all the arts in India, of the theocracies. And when we consider the Middle Ages, the great works of art were largely religious, in painting, in architecture, in sculpture, and in music. So that this element in our makeup, the fact that we are possessed by a desire to reunite ourselves with the infinite, that happens presumably at death. It happens through mystical union, and in the crude expression of life, it happens in the desire to dominate, and the fixation upon a fundamentalist creed. This is right, I am right, all the others are wrong or ignorant. I'm better, therefore, I have the right to dominate, and that is the train of thought that leads people on to, like Hitler and Stalin and Milosevic and Amin and a host of others. And even little people. It's very difficult to teach people the new creed, which I think must be this one that I was trying to describe. That is, that we are not here to to dominate, but to learn and to serve. What Persinger wrote in those words.
The humble servant of the beautiful, rather than its leader or its possessor.
Yes.
Can we? Yes. Can we hurry it less? Don't hurry. And play it half as loud. And don't hurry. Molto vivace. I know it's fast. Because when we go to forte, da the rum pa pum pa pum, the winds da the rum pa pum pa pum, da the rum pa pum, da the rum pa pum. Let's do the last one. It's the last note.
Suffering is when you are isolated, when your pain separates you from the rest of creation, and when you feel that you are a passing fraction which has no value, which can be dispensed with. Well, in truth, no atom can be dispensed with, because it's part of force, of energy and vibration, of which matter is an expression. But it's not matter first, it's energy and vibration first, of which matter is an expression. And maybe before energy and vibration, maybe there's mind, there's knowledge, there's some concept before that. So we don't know, but we are part of it.
Diminuendo, we don't get the last notes. And I'm exaggerating. You've given up our nice bowing. Never mind. All right. Before 6:39. Fast. 6:39. One, two.
Yes, that is true. I am fortunate in that I don't have to recollect other moments, because music is also a refuge and an escape. Just recently I've recorded all the Schubert symphonies with their wonderful melodies and their light gait, you know, the sort of the Schubert's walking promenade, and the intensity behind some of the apparently light-hearted, tender moments. I mean, those are great emotional experiences, and I can go back to 1,000. Therefore, I naturally prefer to dwell on those, but I keep reminding myself of the gold teeth in the coffers taken from the victims in Germany, which I saw. I keep reminding myself of what is happening now in Africa or in Indochina, or for that matter in China itself, in Tibet. I keep reminding myself I don't have to go very far. There are examples within reach. And trying to reconcile the two worlds and say, how can one affect the other? What does it take to improve? Consoling, of course, is a very important element. Consolation, resignation, but also the will to help, to heal, to improve. And music can serve there as well.
The rhythm isn't quite right. We don't get an accent sometimes. You get an accent every 2 bars. You don't get it.
You want every 2 bars or every bar?
Every bar.
Yes,
every bar. Yes. Every bar.
I think I always find it important. My brain works crab-wise. When I think of one thing, I think of the opposite. It's as in music, you know. If you do counterpoint, you try to move the voices in opposite directions. Or in fugue, you produce the inversion of the theme. And these geometrical concepts operate on my thinking. I imagine everybody's thinking, because they seem so natural that if you see something straight, you immediately think, well, how fortunate it is that it's straight and not crooked. Or if you see something straight, you might say, well, wouldn't it be more interesting if it were crooked, you know? But I always think in opposites. And therefore, when I thought of consolation with its relationship to sympathy, I thought of the other outlet, which is violent resentment and revenge. I wish it were much more exciting.
One request means.
Yes?
Is it possible to conduct beginning in 3? 1, 2, 3.
All right, all right, all right. Yes. Now, if I can say, ta-dee-da-dee, pa-da-da-dee, ra-dee-da-dee-da-da-da-da-dee, pa-pa-da-dee-pam-pam. You see, I have a feeling it should be nearer in tempo. Ta-ta-ta-tee-ta. Tee-ra-ra-ra-ra-dee, ta-da-da-dee-da-da-da-da-dee-da-da-da-dee, pa-dee-da-dee-da-bam, bam. Again. First, they had to be saved, those who could be saved, and then they had to start leading a normal, as it were, existence. There were good tailors among them, and they used American army cloth. It was in the British zone, and they were all dressed, men and women, skirts and trousers in the same army cloth. And they'd been liberated about a month or so before. And this was the first music they heard. And it made them feel that they, again, belonged to some form of civilized community. But what must be said, whenever I speak of Belsen, we all automatically think of the unspeakably heinous crimes and the Nazis. But when the English came to liberate Belsen, and came with a small medical team, not nearly large enough to do the hideous job. There were so many deaths, they had to use the bulldozers, as you know, to push them into mass graves and so on, and look after those who were still alive. They recruited German women and girls from the neighborhood. And these women worked absolutely wonderfully, even though they may have known the Germans. But, I mean, until you see something in front of your eyes, you can ignore it. After all, we ignore a lot that's happening in
even if it's around the corner.
Even here, even in East London, after all. And people who had slaves ignored that they had slaves. It's the human nature. You protect yourself and you look after your immediate surroundings, environment, and if you can, you isolate yourself. Today we can't do it any longer Today we know we are interdependent. We can't allow a wound to fester in East London and still keep up our standards. But there I always say that because it's important to say that when these German women saw Belsen, they were absolutely shocked, and they worked night and day with the British. That is a fact.
But you're standing there together with Benjamin Britten,
Yes.
playing. Can you still remember the atmosphere?
Oh,
or
yes.
your own
Oh, yes.
psychological reaction?
Oh, yes, I can, because there was a mixture of the remaining memories of horror and a disbelief that it had stopped, and at the same time a sort of suspense. It was a period of holding their breath. They were relieved, they were naturally grieved at having lost their families, but they were saved. They didn't know what the world held for them, so that they came still under the shroud of what they'd gone through, and they left with a feeling of hope, of belonging to the world, belonging to the beauties of the past and the promise of the future. And indeed, I continued until only a few years ago, and after all, that is 45, that is over 50 years ago, until about 5 or 6 years ago, I received still letters from people who had been at those two concerts.
There's one victim you never saw again, the Gypsy Boy.
I wish I knew what happened to him. He was such a beautiful child. I found him in the hospital, which was a very well-appointed, excellent hospital, which the Germans had in their quarters, where there were beautiful buildings and where the officers and the men danced, and of course they moved all the sick into the German hospitals, into the good hospital. And there I saw this fascinating and beautiful child. I wanted so much to adopt him.
How old was he?
I think about 5 or 6, yes. I wish I knew what happened to him. But I couldn't do it because my own life was in a very complicated and difficult stage. But even so, I regret it. So.
Was music, in those very difficult personal circumstances, a consolation or not even?
Oh yes, obviously. Obviously. Perhaps if I hadn't had the escape of music, maybe I would have settled my affairs more quickly. I don't know. I don't know. But music can be a consolation. Perhaps in this case, had I been forced to, out of sheer survival, my own survival, for all I know, I might have been more determined and ruthless in my decision to be free, as it were. But I don't know. I can't tell. I can't tell.
Tochter aus Elysium, Freude, schöne Götterfunken, Götterfunken. Can we do just that? Can we all do that? Can someone give the chord, A major chord, A with dominant, you know, your A major, A, open A string. That's right. Right. Right? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Tochter aus Elysium. Right? 1, 2, 3. Tochter. What's happening? All right. Can we do the 3 bars? Can we do the 3 bars before? 9:13. 9:13. Tiddle.
Just if you just let them.
You visited Belsen for the second time, years after,
Yes, just a few
without
years
Ben
ago.
Britton.
Yes.
You wrote in your book, I managed to hold back the tears. I am accustomed to expressing what disturbs me only through music.
Yes. I visited Belsen and saw the place I'd known before, and saw it had become sort of a place of remembrance. I must confess to having not so much patience with remembrances, places of remembrances that are exploited by religions, as in the holy places of Jerusalem, where the different faiths fight over each little cubic centimeter of holy ground and charge accordingly. And for me, that's a demeaning of religion. And when I saw even Jewish memorial and Catholic and so on, I feel it as a human crime, as a human wound. And I'd like to include all the crimes that are happening under the names of every kind of religion in the world, as I say, in Vietnam, in Africa, and to see this kind of cornered by a particular religion that wants to claim its martyrs. I find, I don't know, that may be a very personal, subjective reaction I have, but I don't like to see flags flying over territory, even religious flags. I'd love to see this memory put into preventive measures for the future, into education, to enlightening people about what their human nature is capable of. Not a flag waving of we suffered, but a flag waving, how can we, but not a flag waving, how can we prevent such abominations from happening? To what extent are we ourselves responsible for them? Because every person is to a certain extent guilty. Everybody, even if it's only infinitesimal. And I think until we recognize that we are all capable, under certain circumstances, of behaving terribly, and put on guard against ourselves and what can save us and prevent that happening, until we do that, all the rest, look how we suffered. And the Jews who've survived, I mean, 2 generations ago, they are still claiming material rewards for people who have long since disappeared and who cannot receive the reward. Instead of giving it, if there is anything to give it towards preventive efforts in education and in every other field of art and sport and craft and social work. But to claim that as your own right and to put a price on the heads of those who were killed and say that price belongs to me, I can't accept that as anything I could agree to.
You are Jewish? What have the Jews lost since the foundation of the State of Israel?
They've lost their innocence. Until they became a state, they really did observe the 10 Commandments. They did not kill. They were honest. They had good family life. They had, and since they became a state, they have had to become what states become. That is the right to kill. The first characteristic attribute of a self-respecting state is the right to kill, and the only right to kill. Nobody else has the right to kill except the state. And even though we have gone far beyond it in England and in Holland and in enlightened states, unfortunately the Jewish state, Israel, had to apply rather brutal measures to establish itself. And I think the Jewish mission is to prove to the world that there can be reconciliation between former enemies, that Jerusalem can become a city of peace instead of being a city of sacrifice. From Jesus' sacrifice and the Jewish sacrifices, from the Roman days, from the Babylonian days, it has always been a city where thousands and thousands of people have been crucified, murdered in the name of religion. It's continuing. And unless both sides can speak like that and say, let us embrace and let us share and let us change the world, if they could do that, it would be an example for the whole world. And I think if Israel has a mission, this is the mission.
Still to be accomplished.
Still to be accomplished. It's very good. It's very good. But don't wait for no ta da di da da da. Come early and take your time. Take your time on all the notes, but come early. You see, let's just do the 136. We need security, but we need change.
We need beauty and we need cruelty to compare it.
Yes, also. Yeah. Evil is to a certain extent the other side, but then you mustn't go too far with that, because there's a lot of evil that we could avoid if we tried. We can't take it just passively and say, well, it's got to be. It doesn't have to be. There's so many idiotic things, stupid things, ignorant and cruel things that are not necessary in our education and in our society. But nonetheless, there will always be enough cruelty, enough pain.
Yeah.
There will always be. We'll never do it. And it should be that way. We are human beings. We are liable to every kind of disappointment, to accident, to dependent on the whims of destiny. And I have this organization called Live Music Now, and in England we give about 2,000 concerts a year, in France and Germany and so on. And we go to prisons and hospitals and terminal homes and factories and mines and so on and so forth. And once I was going with a group of French musicians to one of those hideous prisons, not far from Paris, which seemed to have walls within walls, and grim, horrid, not a blade of grass, not a plant, nothing growing there at all, except human beings incarcerated. And we came and we played music, quartets and beautiful music, which always has its maximum effect, as I had learned during the war, for people who are in a sad condition, nostalgia or very far away from home or ill, or as in the Aleutian Islands in those days. And we played, and there was great response. And then when I was walking away, between, I think there were 3 walls. There was a center part, you went through a courtyard, another wall and another wall. And as I came to the last wall, one of the prisoners came and brought me a rose. Now, I can't quite describe what a rose meant in those
circumstances.
Under those circumstances, because it was as far away as a vision of paradise would be here in a prison camp. Or so. It's something which was so completely out of context. If he had brought a rag which would be painted, that would be an offering of its own. But a rose between those grim walls was something I couldn't believe. But it meant so much. Where it came from, I don't know.
Not too fast. Not too fast. Hold it back. It's un poco maestoso and moderato. Hobo, that'll be all right.
I never had that kind of blissful life of the amateur, whom I respect, who loves amare, who loves his hobby, in this case music, who would take up music and let's play quartet this evening, or let's do that. My life was geared to the concert platform, and there were moments when I played quartet and so on, but it was more the regular routine, and it's a habit which I've had traveling and giving concerts since I was 13, 14. I've traveled the world, and that life is sort of ingrained in me, and in reality, it's much more ordered than a day at home, because a day at home, here I have to catch up and do 1,000 different things, a lot of correspondence, meeting people, catching up on obligations and my school and extraneous appointments and television and I don't know what. Whereas the concert routine is travel in the morning, settle in, a good sleep in the afternoon, and then the concert in the evening and sleep and telephone calls, telephone my wife and telephone generally some. So that life has a kind of patterned order about it which is very simple. I look at the scores in the flight or in the car and sleep.
I know you come in before the slow movement normally.
Yes. It's a long time to sit.
What?
It's very hard to sit through the whole thing without
singing.
It is. It's cold.
But if we gave you an armchair there...
No, that's because you can't sing the whole time.
No, exactly.
The voice gets cold.
But you see, you wouldn't disturb if you came up there.
Well, we don't want to be disturbed.
I don't know. Let's try it there and see. And if you don't like it, we'll go from it.
Right, I'm afraid you won't like it.
Well, no, I just want to try it.
Yeah.
I want to see what it's like. If it doesn't work, we go from it. Depends, of course, a great deal on what dresses you wear.
Yes, of course. Well, you're not going to see me way back there. I'll tell you that right now.
We need to finish.
Yes.
We need to finish at 6:15. So you have an hour.
Bartók was a unique experience. It was an example of where the power and the beauty of music establish a unity of understanding. between the interpreter and the composer. I wanted to meet him, and I had, out of this pile of contemporary music, I'd chosen two works. The big sonata for violin and piano of Bartók and the great violin concerto. When I arrived on a November day in 43, I suppose, maybe even 42, I can't remember, Bartók had already arrived. I was on time. He'd already arrived. He had drawn up an armchair facing the piano and the window at the far end of the room. He had the music on his lap, and he had a pencil in his hand. The real Hungarian Herr Professor, waiting to pounce on anything wrong. And he was already suffering from leukemia, so he was almost transparent. But the kind of transparency that a lightning has, you know, electrically powerful. And he didn't say a word. There was nothing to do except unpack the violin and go to the piano, tune, and begin playing. He was seated there. At the end of the first movement, he got up from his chair, and in impeccable English, he said, "I didn't think that works could be played that beautifully until long after the composer was dead." Of course, those words to me were like manna from heaven, because it meant that I had understood him. Not only the music, but I had understood the man. Perhaps better than many people who would have only talked to him.
What did you understand in playing so wonderful?
I understood the man who controlled a tremendous, powerful violence with the serenity and the passion for goodness and understanding, very like Beethoven. Very, very, and also the quartets follow the same evolution. A man who was very Hungarian, very idiomatic, composing music that was not literally Hungarian, but actually in spirit very much Hungarian, and where the accents fell, and where the determination, and where the cries, and where the shrieks, and where the compassion, and where the sadness and the crying at the end of the first movement. All this I felt, and I was also accustomed to observe minutely, as I always do, the indications of the composer, and then transform them into living reality. So it's not only at this note at this time, but as it has to be shaped by the emotion and the thought. So anyway, when he said that, I felt I had really, it was one of the great moments of my life, because it was proof that I was capable of understanding a human being, a composer. And fortunately, we played the second and third movement equally well. And then I was emboldened to ask him if he would compose something for me. I wanted to ask the minimum because he was suffering, and everyone said he needed money and so on. And I could have asked him, I'm sure, for a violin concerto, but I asked him for a sonata for violin alone, which was the minimum I could impose on him. And you know, he didn't cash the check until I had played the work and he had composed it and I could play it. Quite amazing. He was a great man, really great man. And he found it difficult in New York because, of course, the Americans are very warm-hearted and so on, but he wasn't the kind of man that would engage in trivial conversation. And it seemed to me he never said an unnecessary word. I mean, there was no how are you, where did you come from, where are you going, what are you doing, what beautiful weather, what... He never said any word that wasn't essential.
Yes, answering the question, do you know what time it is? Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. The norms of beauty resemble very much the norms of beauty in a woman, in nature. It has to have behind it a live temperament which is capable of extremes, otherwise it's shallow. It has to have the capacity for passion, for anger, for perhaps impatience, for at the same time great tenderness, and at the same time the warmth and the promise and the hope, and then the norms of beauty which are rather, in terms of what we need and feel, they're rather rounded than jagged, you know, the isolation of the jagged. Although you can have cruel landscapes that have a certain beauty. The most devastating and depressing landscape I've ever seen was in the Greek island, where they had a huge volcanic eruption 2,000 years ago, and where half the island is covered with black lava. That black lava is still hot and has horrifying shapes, jagged and sharp, where you cannot walk on it. It's like hell. If you imagined hell, that would be hell. And heaven would be a wonderfully fertile land producing grazing and olives and fruit and so on. And we have today art that is perhaps a little too near the real. By that I mean that art must sublimate the violent in a way. It must communicate it. As I said, the beauty of a woman who has all these capacities and at the same time has the proportions. The art in relation to violence must sublimate the violence, but today with our television and our means of reproducing in 3 dimensions reality in all its immediacy does not serve the purpose of sublimation. You can depict, like Goya, the horrors of assassination, but there is still some redeeming message there. You don't actually see the blood run. There is that difference. The motion picture and the television in color and all have brought us closer to the unsublimated reality. And as such, it induces either the most violent reactions, or it induces a kind of armor, of what can I do? It happens every day, and we can't do anything about it. A kind of thick skin, which has to protect itself, because if it reacted all the time, it couldn't continue with its own life. So that I reproach that. There isn't that kind of art that sublimates, because Beethoven can be very violent and use dissonances of half tones with power and intransigence, and which really strikes you. But it still is sublimated, because it isn't the actual act of violence. And so beauty doesn't have to be all the time serene and so on, though we need that too. We need serenity, we need meditation. But if it sublimates our basic emotions, our drives, it can contribute to a civilized society. Beethoven's Ninth is a work that, like the great Passions of Bach or a great play of Shakespeare, they purge the emotions and the soul by taking you through the whole cycle of love and anger and pain and frustration, serenity, and finally joy. I think the audience after that work must be fully purged, and when they walk out on the street, they'll be good people for 5 minutes.
Wonderful choir. Wonderful, bravo. Thank you very much. Very much.
According to the promised heavens, it's an impossible place. I don't believe in heaven or hell. I believe that you make your own heaven and hell to a certain extent on earth, and other people contribute to it. My heaven, the good things that I enjoy, are largely dependent on all other people and what they bring to my life. That's why I'm very fortunate. I'm very modest about my good fortune, and I want to repay it in a way to try to ensure that it's going to continue. There's an element of reciprocity there between my life and all other lives. So that's the ongoing exchange and change that happens. And we are always looking for change. We need security, but we need change. What?
At your funeral.
At my funeral?
Is there some music to be played?
Well, I can't decide. I have suggested that it should be a happy occasion and a rejoicing and no weight and nothing. But because I don't like the formal, black, and I don't like it. One lives one's life. It's been a very good life, wonderful life, and people should feel, well, that's fine. and let's move on. I don't want a trauer, if you know.
Not a kind of tragedy.
Tragedy. I wouldn't like that.
No, just an instant. I died, go on.
Yeah, that's it, yes.